Hello and welcome to Ways to Change the World. I'm Krishnan guru-murthy, and this is the podcast in which we talk to extraordinary people about the big ideas in their lives and the events that have helped shape them. Now, it's fair to say that people on this podcast have usually lived a little bit. They are, shall we say, around my age or older. But my guest this week is anything but. In fact, she's just turned 20, and she is the youngest writer to ever have a novel selected by Oprah Winfrey for Oprah's book club. And her debut novel has just gone in to the New York Times top 10 bestsellers list. My guest is Leila Mottley, and her book is called Nightcrawling. I think you're going to be hearing a lot about this book over the next few months because it's already pretty big. The book takes in a lot of big themes: racism, sexism, poverty, injustice, policing, and it's set in Leila's home city of Oakland, California, where she has years of experience as a public artist because she was also the youth poet laureate. Leila, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Well, huge congratulations first on the success of the book. It's an absolutely extraordinary thing to go straight into that top 10 and perhaps even bigger to be selected by Oprah. And you've been on talk shows and, interviews and all the rest of it. What's that like for you?
It's been overwhelming. Just the response to it has been incredible. I think there's just such a long lead time between when you write a book and sell a book and when the world gets to see that book. So it's been just such a crazy feeling to have people reading it.
What was that moment like when Oprah popped up on the screen to tell you you were in the book club?
It was a surprise of a lifetime. Yeah, I couldn't even process it. It took me a few months before I really knew that it was real. And then it was about, I think, 5 months before the news came out, and then a whole other wave of just processing and experiencing all of what it means to be an Oprah Winfrey book club pick.
So when did you write this book? How old were you?
I had almost turned 17. I wrote the first chapter, I think, the month before I turned 17, and then the rest of the book in the first months of being 17.
And did you intend it as a full-blown novel?
Yeah, always.
Had you written anything like that length before?
Yes, this was my third novel. So I wrote my first novel at 14, and then my second at 15, and then this, my third, at 17.
Wow. And what's happened to those first two?
They're locked in a drawer somewhere and will never see the light of day.
So publishers aren't asking you to dig them out?
Oh, they've asked, but I will not be doing that ever.
So Nightcrawling is set in Oakland, your home city, but as you say in your notes at the back of the book, it was in a way sparked by a real life story.
It was inspired by, the first seed of the novel, really, came from a true case that broke in 2016 where a young girl was sexually abused by members of Bay Area police departments, and it kind of consumed our local media, and I remember paying a lot of attention to it at the time. I think I was 13 or 14, and being so struck by the way that the media talked about this case, and really just the complete neglect of focus on the impact on this young girl and the harm of so many girls and women that we don't ever hear about.
What was it about the way the case was being portrayed in the media that struck you? I mean, because you were very young. I mean, we're talking 7 years ago, aren't we?
I listened to these interviews, and there were all of these local news reports that came out, and so much of it was about the police officers in the police department and the impact on the trust between the community and the police department, and so little of it was about the actual harm done to this girl.
So is this your imagining of that girl?
No. That was just, I think, the seed of it, and then from there I researched other cases of police sexual violence, and it was a good 4 or 5 years later before I started writing this novel. And really my intention for this book was to create a character and her world and allow her to have full narrative control, because I don't think we often see, young Black girls in positions in literature where they have that kind of complete agency and in control over a story. And I wanted to particularly show that with this girl who is a survivor.
And is that why you've written this in her voice, in the first person?
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's really important that we get to be inside of her head and not distance ourselves from her.
So, you say you were researching other cases of police sexual violence.
Mm-hmm.
How extensive a problem did you discover that it was?
It's a huge issue. We don't have as much data on it as we should, but that makes sense because reportings happen very rarely. It's hard to report to the very people who are hurting you in the first place, and a system that many people just don't trust. And so I think that we definitely don't have all of the information on it, but we know that it is very, very common, and that mainly women of color, girls of color, and queer and trans people are being targeted.
Did you find that shocking, the extent of it?
No, not at all. I think that sexual violence has always been used as a tactic for control, and when you have a system that abuses power, you're always going to also have sexual violence be a part of that.
How aware were you of these issues at the time of the case?
I think that I was aware, probably not as aware as I am now, but I understood what it was like to, walk the world in my body, and I understood the implications of being Black in a world with police, and I had a pretty foundational awareness. But I also think, I was young, I was still understanding what it meant to exist in this world.
So will you set the scene for us in terms of the story, the novel itself? I mean, what would you like people to know about it before they pick it up?
So the story follows Kiara, a 17-year-old Black girl living in Oakland, California, when she finds herself involved with a network of police officers who sexually exploit her. And it follows the investigation that comes out of it, but mostly it follows Kiara and her world and the people she loves and the position she's been put in as this young girl who really hasn't gotten a chance to experience much of her childhood, as she's been caring for all of the people around her. And then she finds herself in a position where she once again is not being protected.
But it's also about her relationship with a young boy, isn't it? A sort of a surrogate brother or surrogate son.
Yeah, in some ways both. Trevor, her 9-year-old next door neighbor, his mother's an addict and is kind of in and out of caring for him, and Kiara takes on this kind of caretaking role for him, I think partly as a way to sort of remother herself through trying to mother him, but she's also kind of a kid herself and doesn't have the resources to make his world different than her own. And she also kind of, I think, gets to experience glimpses of childhood through him and through their relationship, but the conditions of their life don't allow them to get their needs met and care for each other at the same time.
I mean, the conditions that you describe, or the setting you describe, I mean, is obviously, it's gritty, it's difficult, it's grim. So how important is it to also explore happiness and joy with those characters and love?
I mean, it's so important because I think that in stories around, Black tragedy, Black violence, we often forget the humanity in it all, and people are full of so many different experiences and emotions, and we need to see them all and include them all in every story. And so I wanted to make sure that this world that we get to see includes all of that, and that we see them in positions of, hope and joy and delight, and we see them in times of grief and rest and just all kinds of experiences. We see them just like take a nap, and we see them do mundane things like make breakfast, and we also see them in these positions of terror. And I think that it's important that we see it all, and we witness it all, and we recognize them, each experience, as important as the next.
And did you set out writing this with a sense of purpose? Of specifically hitting these issues and opening people's eyes to something?
No, I think that when I start writing, am entirely intending to do justice to the characters and the world that I create, and to create a story. I'm a storyteller first and foremost, and I think that one of the most important parts of fiction is that we expand our ideas of our countries and our world through reading narratives that I think are often excluded. But my intention first and foremost is always to create an authentic world, and to allow us to invest in and love these people.
Well, how hard is it to create an authentic world? I mean, was this a world you understood, really? Because I mean, your own life, well, in many ways, it couldn't be further away from Kiara's life, could it?
I mean, I think that there is a lot of overlap between me and Kiara, and there are also ways in which we're very different. I was born and raised in Oakland. I still live in Oakland. I grew up right up the street from where most of the book is set. Many of the streets Kiara walks every day, I also walked every day. And so I kind of had that kind of basis of knowledge and understanding of her. I was 17 when I wrote this book, so I was a 17-year-old Black girl at the same time as I was writing through the perspective of one. And I think that all of those overlaps and mergings helped me tell this story, definitely.
So tell us a little bit about Oakland then. I mean, what's it like as a city? I think it's not a very well known city in the UK. So tell us a little bit more about it.
Oakland is in Northern California. It is a city on the coast. It is about like a 15-minute drive / train ride from San Francisco. It's just like the best place on earth, in my opinion. And it has a lot of nature, like a million trees. There's a lake in the center of the city. We're right on the bay, so there's kind of always water everywhere. And it's just like full of really vibrant people, really strong artist community. And it is a historically Black city. It was the birthplace and kind of the hub of the Black Panther Party, and has kind of a strong activist tradition.
And how much of that Black history is infused in you if you grow up in Oakland? I mean, do you grow up knowing all about the Black Panthers?
I mean, I guess it depends on who you are. I did, but I think it's kind of like ingrained in a lot of our culture, and just like this kind of revolutionary tradition where so many elders who were former Black Panthers still live in Oakland, and I think we definitely get infused with the at least the history, if not the tradition and the all of the just incredible doctrines of the party.
I mean, you mentioned that, I mean, there's a strong sort of public arts tradition in Oakland. So how did you get drawn into that? I mean, where did it all begin for you? I mean, was it parents? Was it school? Was it a teacher? Was it your dad? What was it?
So I think that I started writing when I first learned how to, and I have always done it kind of instinctually and loved it. And my dad has been a writer my whole life too, but he's definitely a struggling artist and has always had a day job. So I definitely saw someone who pursued writing as something that they just loved, regardless of how it went or how hard it was to be an artist. And I definitely think that informed my ideas of art.
And have you always done both prose and poetry?
Yeah, I have. Since I started writing, I've done both. I think I just do poetry more publicly up until this point.
So how did you become the youth laureate?
It's a competition, so I applied and I went through a few rounds of judging, and then I was the 2018 Oakland Youth Poet Laureate, which means I went around the Bay Area and I performed a lot of poetry, and I had work solicited from me to write around different themes, and I ran writing workshops, all kinds of things.
What did you get from that? Because I mean that's it's a public platform for you to address big ideas and creativity.
I think it's so special to have people who want to listen, and I got to meet a lot of incredible people too through the experience. I learned how to perform, and I learned how to be a better poet and to be able to translate some feeling to an audience in 1 minute, and it is an invaluable skill, I think.
And do you think that affected your ability to write the novel?
I think that my writing style is kind of poetic. So definitely my poetry influences my writing, but I also think that so much of them are separated for me, where I think that of poetry is more of a public pursuit often, unless it's my written poetry. But for my spoken word or performance poetry, I do that very publicly, and then my fiction is more solitary. It's just me and the words and the page.
Do you think we could have a little bit of you and the words on the page? Would you mind reading a little bit? I mean, I don't know whether you want to start at the beginning or if you have another section that you'd rather read, but just a short
section. I have a
section.
Little section that I could read, yeah. Okay. This section is about Oakland, and it is with Kiara and her best friend, Ale. And they're just walking down the street. Ale loops her arm around my shoulders and pulls me in, lifting her skateboard into the air and sighing. Ain't it beautiful? She shouts into the open air, and I twist my head around to take it all in. The construction still lines the alley, banging wood into more wood, and I swear it's like the city is spiraling around us. Skyline popping up, a glorious portrait of windows and wheels that don't gotta be as large as they are. Ale's arm around me makes me want to skip, lift my knees to the sky the way we sway together. Oakland doesn't operate on a grid. We wind here, the streets pulling us closer to the bay, to where salt melts with street and bikes turn to trucks that moan and thrust forward at every light. Then they push us back toward the buildings, where shouts line the perimeter of the sidewalks, and with Ale here, I don't bother trying to decipher what they're saying or who they're saying it to. Just let the noises scatter, like chunks of asphalt out the road. I find my favorite murals, new swirls added to the backgrounds, bordered in tags.
That's beautiful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, I just wanted to ask you about a couple of things that you've talked about. You say in the note that you were often told growing up to shield your brother, your dad, and the black men around you for their safety, to protect them. Can you just unpack that for me?
I mean, I think it's something that where many Black girls and women are taught kind of consciously and subconsciously, verbally and not, from a very young age, that it's our role to care for the Black men that we love and to protect them. And, there are historical implications of that. But also, I think even just many Black kids get the talk about, police violence from a young age, and I did. And when my dad was talking to me and my brother about it, it's very much through the lens of what policing does to Black men often. And I remember wondering just why I didn't get to talk about the specific types of violence that are done to Black women and Black girls. And I think even in these movements founded by and organized by Black women, like Black Lives Matter, like Say Her Name, even Me Too, they are often co-opted, and we see this decentering of Black women. But I think that there is this lack of recognition of the vulnerability of Black women and Black girls that happens across the board.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good observation. I mean, sadly, I've covered quite a lot of these awful, instances of violence and of police violence in the US. And you go to these places and your focus as a reporter is often inevitably on the women who are around the victims.
Right.
And that is often how we see Black women in the context of police violence.
Grieving. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that grief is definitely a part of it, but we are expected to talk about, and experience police violence and violence in general only through the lens of the grief that we have for others and how we wish we had protected this person or could protect that person, and not in what it does to us.
Yes, because I mean, the other thing you talk about is the adultification of Black girls. What is that? What do you mean by that?
Black girls are often put in a position that from a very young age we're asked to carry things that we shouldn't have to. And I think that it forces us to behave as though we are older than we are. There, from the hypersexualization of Black girls to the amount of caretaking that is put on us from such an early age, it really does force us to grow up quicker, or at least act as though we are older, while at the same time not receiving the type of respect that we might associate with adulthood.
Could you just explain, when you talk about hypersexualization of Black girls, what are you talking about? And what, what's the importance of Black in that sentence?
I mean, many of the images that we see of Black girls and Black women are sexualized, and I know that many Black girls experience harassment and sexual assault from such an early age, myself included. And I think that because we experience that so early on, it's from the age of 10 or 11, we're taught that we are sexual beings to be consumed and commodified first before we're ever people.
And do you think it's different for Black girls than white girls or Hispanic girls?
I think that it's all about degrees. I think often girls of color experience this, and sometimes in different ways. But I know that the rates at which Black girls are sexually assaulted and the media representations of Black women and Black girls lean hypersexual, far more often than white women and white girls.
What do you think that tells you about Black men?
I mean, I think it is really a reflection of the ways that we have all been taught to be complicit in the harm of Black girls and Black women, and the ways in which Black men have also been taught that in order to feel powerful or in control, they have to be dominating Black women. And I think that it's a really sad reality, that puts us in another position in which, in order to care for Black men and even protect Black men from the justice system, we have to ignore and neglect our own hurt and our own assaults.
I'm thinking back 2 years to the protests that followed the George Floyd murder.
Mm-hmm.
And you presumably had already been, either you'd finished writing the book or you were in the process of finishing writing the book.
Yes.
How did that sit? How did that feel? And what was your reaction to all of those events?
Yeah, I'd finished writing the book in 2019, so it was about a year later. And I mean, I think that it was a very similar experience to the 2015 uprisings, except maybe social media was even more prevalent, particularly because of COVID. And I remember feeling, some rage about the performative activism with all of the black squares and all of that. But I went to protests almost every day, and I was tear gassed and kind of like constantly confronting the reality of what it even means to resist, and particularly, the ways that Black women were again just sidelined in all of it. It felt very similar to 2015, which is sad with 5 years between them, but not surprising.
I mean, when you say rage at the performative nature of it, just explain that.
I mean, I think there was like a social pressure around showing that you cared, and that often existed on social media in ways that it didn't exist in person. And so, people that were never going to actually show up and put their actual bodies between Black people and the police would post a square on social media as though that was ever going to protect us. And I think it's that kind of thing that is harmful for those of us who then are going out and are on the ground, and are experiencing the very daily implications of white supremacy, and to have that contrasted with a very passive act is enraging.
And I mean, would you mind? It's fascinating interviewing you because you have so many sort of little passing clauses that I want to stop and go, hang on, just unpack that. When you talk about living with white supremacy, what does that mean to you?
Oh, it means so many things. I mean, we often talk about like microaggressions versus macroaggressions, and I think that there are things that happen on a daily basis that are small, and then there are the huge things like when you go to a protest and you experience the very constant nature of being looked at and terrorized, and even just like encountering white supremacists in person and having people who refuse to even look at you, or slurs chanted. And I think that those are like some of the macro things, but it's also just the ways that people expect things from Black girls and Black women and Black people in general that they wouldn't expect from anyone else, being assumed to be the servant or employee, and having people touch your hair, and just like all kinds of things that are based in and rooted in white supremacy. But I think that it's always hard to define it because it looks different every single day.
Having experienced it, having been part of those protest movements when they've erupted, and growing up in Oakland, I mean, do you have a sense of what needs to change and how it could change?
I mean, I think that we always need to look first at systems, and almost every system is interconnected, and so it's important, like, if we're gonna dismantle policing, then there also needs to be a dismantling of prisons and the carceral system, and then there also needs to be ways in which systems support Black people in their basic needs, and if we're going to work on housing, then we also need to work on employment and food, and I think it's just like becomes so impossible to target what thing needs to change first. But I mean, I think that first we have to confront and acknowledge what we are doing and what we have done. And then comes, the even harder part, which is being able to acknowledge that many of us have fear about what it would mean to exist without systems that we have lived with our entire lives. And I think that fear often keeps us from changing anything. But sometimes we need to lean into fear and look at, what do we need to sacrifice in order to move forward and do it differently. So I'm not sure we'll get there in my lifetime or the next, but I hope that we make more progress.
Do you think the political environment at the moment makes you, not just Black people in general, feel any more safe or secure from the violence of racism?
I mean, I think it depends on who you ask, because I feel like my dad would say that it is better now than it was 40, 50 years ago. But I would also say that it's just changed. And I don't feel like I feel safer. I think that there are just different ways that the system operates now, often more covertly. And I think that social media has changed a lot about the ways that information is passed, and the ways that, just like most people, like the masses, operate around race and speak about race. So I think that it's just changed, but it doesn't mean that it is better necessarily.
Well, I mean, to come back to your writing in the book, I mean, what you've spoken about very powerfully is the need to give voice to people who have been ignored, perspectives that have been ignored over time. How have you, or how are you checking that you've got it right?
I don't know if anyone ever knows that they got it right. I think I just try to write the thing that feels the most authentic to me, and the most authentic to my characters. And from there, I hope that it feels that way to readers too.
I also read somewhere that you'd asked somebody who'd been a sex worker or a current sex worker to also read the book. Is that right?
Yeah, it was important to me that we had a sex worker read the book, because there's so much information about sex work and so many varying opinions about it. And I knew that in order to tell the most authentic story, I needed someone with actual experience in sex work to give feedback and notes, and logistical advice, and it was invaluable.
And personally, where'd you go from here? Because you're still studying, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm on a break from school, so we'll see when I go back, or if I go back. But I'm still writing. I have a poetry collection coming out in the next year or so, and then I am working on my next novel, which I can't say too much about. But I'm always going to be writing about forgotten Black girls, and I think that it's just going to be a very new way. Yeah.
And I mean, will you say if you go back, are you wondering whether to bother going back and finish, or will you definitely do that?
I'm kind of doing what I would have gone to school to do, so we'll see if I feel like it would give me something or not. But I try not to do things just because they're the path that has been outlined as the most acceptable way to move forward in life. So I would make sure that if I went back, I did it because I actually wanted to.
Well, there are young people all over the world who are writing stories, who dream of living your life, of getting the deal. So you're the perfect person to advise them. What's your advice to young writers?
Keep writing always, and write for you first. Write like no one is ever going to read it, because it will be the most authentic thing. And I mean, I think that it's hard out here, and it is a hard industry to enter, and we all just need to like always remember that the stories are the most important thing here, and that we all should just like focus on telling the story that needs to exist in the world and doesn't.
And we have an end question on this podcast, which is, if you could change the world in any way, how would you change it?
In one way, I would just want Black girls and Black women to feel like we have every ability to experience and exist in whatever way we want to, and I would want to like give Black women and Black girls like moments of rest, just like breathing room, and I would want us all to get to experience ourselves as more than what we do for others.
Well, I hope you're getting some breathing room on what I suspect is a very frenetic promotional tour.
It is.
Well, Leila Mottley, thank you very much indeed for sharing your ways to change the world. You can watch all of these interviews on the Channel 4 News YouTube channel. Our producer is Nina Hodgson. Until next time, bye-bye.